I'm talking about lame blame because that's where we're having these conversation. What some people think is in post. You get what I mean? Like for example, that's why I said your lack of understanding of what's going on. That drill music these days is probably one of the top 3 most prevalent and most popular and most lucrative type of music that any type of and it's spread to the UK, Toronto, Jacksonville. It's in New York. So when I say that to you, do you really think that it's a fair place of blame, especially even these days, right? Philly has the worst murder rate. You can look it up by capita currently, right? They're also getting into this same type of style. What I did with the war in Chirac ended in 2017. Lil Durk just got a multi-platinum record where he's making fun of another popular rapper who just died last year. Lil Durk is way up. He is not in the position of these people who you're trying to act like, oh, they're victims of circumstances. These people are now, they're the villains of opportunity, where they're like, yo, hey, so that's why I always look at people who are misinformed. I said, well, if we're going to have the proper conversation, number one, I never started it, right? Granted, did I say I have zero blame to take? I think I took some blame even in this, and I've always publicly said it. I said everybody who has thought about when it comes to drill music does not want to have the real discussion. Because when you're saying it's part of Lil Durk's story, what part of Lil Durk's story now when he's rapping about all these millions that he has and all the things he could do financially and he's in Beverly Hills, what part of that has to do with him inciting a gang war? And this is a gang war, my brother. When you sit here and you make a song called Should Have Ducked, and you know that one of the biggest rappers who was upcoming was called FBG Duck, and you're making fun of his death. That's when the feds just arrested 3 people, well, actually more than 3, about 4 to 5 people from O Block, basically saying these guys were responsible for their death. If you think that it starts or it stops with academics, you're just not like.
But I don't think that, and I think I've been trying to hammer on this point over and over again. I don't think you are as relevant as you think I said you were in this conversation as it pertains to beefing up gang violence. In the video itself, I have talked about how it was unhelpful, and you recognize that as well, okay? But ultimately, the real relevant component with respect to violence is always going to be material conditions. That is the larger overarching issue, and I think that you and I probably agree on that as well. There are responsible parties that are not from these areas that are also taking advantage of the situation and making money off of this kind of back and forth violence, and in certain instances, quite literally instigating it. But if the actors that are instigating it are people like Lil Durk, well, they're still from these communities. They still have family members in these communities. They still have a direct relationship with these communities. So when they are making art, when they're making art about their own personal experiences, it might have an incendiary or inciting component to it, right? It might. And I'm sure you know better than I do about Lil Durk's discography.
No, I'm gonna extrapolate. You saying that is kind of like, you know, when Kanye's jumping out saying like, yo, he's still a slave, or when he's going at Jewish people. Like, essentially, these guys are privileged guys who we're talking about now. Like you keep saying.
I think Kanye has a little bit more privilege than Lil Durk does. Like proximity wise, like Lil Durk is closer to O Block than Kanye is to his original beginnings in Chicago. I mean, he's a billionaire. I think that, you know, both of those statements could be true, but there is definitely a larger impact on one.
Hold on. And this is where I got to educate you again, right? Lil Durk still raps about a young kid, right, who lost his life in Chicago that had no resources like him, never made it out, nothing like that. A kid named Tuka literally uses him as a punchline to make his songs hot and to make himself seem more relative to his fan base, to make it seem like he's in Chicago. He's not in Chicago. He's not running the same blocks. And you know what people do when they hear that? Because I had to sit and listen to the mother of FBG Doug cry to me and say, why won't you show the other side of it? Because these guys are getting millions. These guys are running up millions off of a situation.
But it's their story though, right? Like, you understand, like, no matter how much you try to remove Lil Durk, say he lives in Beverly Hills or whatever, those are his real experiences, real lived experiences that originally is what made Lil Durk. So ultimately, if everyone is exploiting a situation, if there's one party that is like the most adequate to exploit the situation, it's still always going to be someone like Lil Durk. So that's my take overall.
No, that's great. No, listen. Hey, I love when you debate. And by the way,
I'm not a good debater. I don't like debating. I don't think this is a debate.
No. You had Andrew take down in the first 4. It's all good. Here's the thing. Let me say this to you. Okay, great. I'm gonna go with what you say. Right? So, okay, he could say whatever he wants to say because that's his.
No, I'm not saying that.
What are you saying?
I'm not denying the impact that Lil Durk's music might have on street level violence. Okay, but
you're not.
If there is one person,
blame though. You're saying that he's allowed to speak on it, and I'm telling you, listen. It's one thing if you're, hey, okay, you have nothing going on. You're just rapping about what's going on with you in your reality. Lil Durk has signed over $100 million in record deals, and his reality is not what these guys are actually talking about anymore. It's been a long time since then. So right now, what he does, I'm telling you, because I've talked to the mom of the deceased, of the people from the other side. He has a large enough voice that when he says something, it's fanning the fuse. That's what it is. So I always say, why does my name ever get brought up when, okay, you could say you may have been part of the problem at a point, but you stopped. You exited 2017. Then I asked everyone, what about these other people who are still encouraging? There's somebody.
But you were never from there. That's the difference. I think that's like, if we're gonna talk about you versus Lil Durk,
okay,
covering this sort of stuff, like, he's making art. He is telling his story versus you're just covering it. If I think that like there is moral culpability there, I would still put you in a worse position overall than someone who is just basically rapping about their own personal experiences while making art. But obviously still nowhere near as bad as like record labels who also prod and poke and make the situation worse overall, especially because dead or alive, they're still going to profit.
Wait, but I've watched your extensive commentary about what's going on in Ukraine and other places. You're not from there. Why do you choose to? Because you're using a very amateur tactics of like what the actual rappers say, because they're usually saying, well, this is like, hey,
because
we're broke.
Well, I'm a commentator, and so are you, right?
Yeah.
When I'm talking about,
do you comment on other things going on in other countries or other? Where are you from, by the way?
I'm from Turkey. I grew up in Turkey.
Okay. Do you comment on things going on outside of that?
Yeah, of course. And I live in America now, and I don't exclusively talk about what's going on in America. I talk about larger narratives. I'm not from Chicago. I've never been to Chicago. I talk about white supremacy. I'm a white person. I'm not a black person, obviously. And yes, I do talk about things that are happening, but my coverage oftentimes is not going to incite further anger. Usually I try to avoid that. That's precisely what I'm saying here. But again, like, let's say someone, I guess I can't even make a comparison with respect to like Ukraine, right? But one thing I always get mad at, and this is a constant, right? People, I call them Naperville kids, okay? There's a lot of white kids in Naperville that, will run around saying, you ain't slide for Vaughn. You ain't slide for Vaughn. And it's like, bro, you live in a fucking McMansion that your mom and dad got, okay? And you are so careless in the way that you are celebrating Black Death, specifically as though it's just for you to consume. It's just content for you to consume when we're talking about fucking, real people dying, okay?
And that is consistent with my analysis here.
Do you think that that's a byproduct of like my coverage, or do you think it's a byproduct of probably the larger scope of everywhere?
No, it's a much larger. No, it's much larger than your coverage. It's.
I did the Warren Shark for 3 years. I never said when is so and so going to slide for so and so. You know,
no, I'm not. You're missing my point.
Lil Durk said we're going to slide for your mans. Yo, if I ever die, make sure you slide for me.
I'm not saying you're doing that. I'm stating. I don't think you. I don't know why you don't hear me when I say this. This is not about my analysis of your content. If you want to have a conversation with like moral culpability in comparison to you versus Lil Durk, then that's a different conversation. But if we're going to talk about like the larger systemic problems, then of course you are nowhere near as relevant in the field of battle or in the way that people live every day. And their everyday experiences in comparison to like even what record labels are doing. The "you ain't slide for Vaughn" shit that a random white kid from Naperville says is just a further extension of the way that I think record labels profit off of black violence and black bodies in the streets. I think that it's not good, and there are way larger people. There are way larger faulty actors here than you or Adam 22, or if you're going to talk about people that are sharing their own personal experiences, like the rappers themselves.